Hi, welcome to my channel. This is an after-action report of a game I recently played using my homegrown rules, The Rising of the Clans. These rules are specifically designed for the Jacobite Rebellion of 1745-46. And I've tried to capture the flavor of this very unique period of history. You have the Highland clans and their ferocious charges against the well-disciplined ranks of the British government. You have different personalities, different qualities of troops involved. And so I've taken systems from different rules that I like and tried to incorporate them to get a satisfactory result. And after several play tests, I think I've got a system that I really enjoy, that I think is realistic, but is balanced and achieves a satisfactory outcome. So anyway, I hope you enjoy the video. And if you're not a member of my channel, I'd sure love you to subscribe. And if you have any comments, I'd love to hear them. So thank you so much for watching, and happy gaming to you. Turn one. In this scenario, the Duke of Cumberland is trying to block the road down south to the Jacobite forces trying to get into England. And initially in the battle, he had two brigades to hold the line, this river line. Over here, he had Mordaunt's with 3 battalions and a battery. And over here, he had Lascelles, some mortars. And then he placed his battery up here on this hill as kind of a safeguard, a second line. Bonnie Prince Charlie entered on this table edge with 2 brigades. Here he had John Roy Stuart's men, and they've come out and deployed. And then he had MacDonald's cavalry. And then over on his other flank, that's Lord Drummond's brigade that's come in. And they've deployed. General Hawley entered on at the end of turn 1. And so he'll basically be taking over this flank. And then at the end of turn 1, Lord Murray's men entered, which is the Athol Brigade and another regiment and a battery. And so they're going to probably try to get to that T in the crossroads there, and then from there they're in the central position. The government forces are spread pretty thin. And so it's just a matter of them trying to hold out long enough for reinforcements to arrive. They'll be arriving in the next several turns, as will more Scottish reinforcements as well. So that's the end of turn 1. Turn 2 definitely went in the government forces' favor. John Roy Stuart's card was drawn first, and he tried to get his forces across the stream here to charge, but they each rolled pretty high, so they only got one move. That was very unfortunate for the artillery, because they could move, but they were still limbered. And when Lascelles' card came up, his artillery fired, could only hit on a 6, but was able to get the 6. And with just even one casualty, the Scottish artillery is fragile enough that it's now worn. So MacDonald's cavalry moved up. George Murray's men just got an 8, rolled an 8. That gave them one move. So they were only able to get that far down the road. These guys, these 2 clans, were disordered going across the river. And fortuitously for the government forces, Cholmondeley's brigade enters on turn 2, right where they're needed most, right on this most threatened flank. On the other flank, General Hawley advanced so he could be in command and add his initiative to Mordaunt's. This unit fired, inflicted 3 casualties on the line there. The cannon fired, and this line fired and was able to reload. And so now this unit has 4 casualties on it.
When it came time for Drummond to roll his die, he wanted to fire his cannon first, and they rolled an unmodified 11, which in these rules means that that's it. Nothing else could be done. And so Drummond's men basically absorbed a lot of punishment, but were not able to dish out any. So that was a very unfortunate turn of events for them. So the government forces are getting reinforcements, and the inactivity has cost the Scots dearly for this turn. Let's move on to turn 3. Turn 3, again, was not a really great turn for Prince Charlie. Drummond did get into action this time. The Cameron of Lochiel's regiment took cannon and musketry, and yet miraculously didn't suffer any hits. They returned the volley, but didn't inflict any casualties. The Scottish battery fired its first round and inflicted a casualty there. But other than that, it was pretty quiet on this flank. The Clan Barksdale here broke into line, and then Clan Keppoch, MacDonald Keppochs, came up to support the Lochiel regiment. On the other flank, a lot happened. Cholmondeley only got one activation, so he could only move up 8 inches. But the 8th Foot got very, very aggressive, and they got the initiative, and they got 3 actions, and so they were able to charge John Roy Stuart's regiments that were up here disordered, and they won a victory of 4-0, which meant that one regiment was worn, so it was automatically picked up, and the third one is now worn and driven back. So John Roy Stuart's brigade is in pretty tough straits. John MacDonald and his cavalry saw an opportunity with the flank being exposed, and so his 2 smaller regiments charged into the flank. Now, they were disordered going across the river. They hit them in the flank. They did manage to inflict a single casualty, but this being a veteran regiment, even though they only hit on 6s, they did manage to take out 2 of MacDonald's cavalrymen. And then we rolled to see if the commander's hit. He rolled a 9. Now, normally it would be a 10 would be a light wound, but when he's actually attached, you subtract 1 from the die roll, so that made it, or you add 1 to the die roll, so that gave him a 10, so he's lightly wounded. So, fortunately, he wasn't hurt any more badly than that. And then Murray over here rolled an 11. So his whole force just stays put. So he's desperately needed in the battle, but for some reason he's just staying here and not getting very far along. So his forces could make a huge difference, but right now they're not in play. So that's the end of turn 3. Again, the government forces, their line is holding, and they're basically have the edge right now. Turn 4, the first card came to MacDonald's cavalry, and so they gallantly reorganized, charged once again into the flank of the 8th Foot, and won the combat and drove them back. So that was very successful on their part. The rest of the cavalry didn't really do anything. Over here, John Roy Stuart got 3 actions, and so he attached himself to Clan Gordon of Glenbucket's regiment and rallied off 2 casualties, so they're no longer worn, and he reorganized them. On the other, Cholmondeley's brigade basically is taking up a defensive position here. Lascelles, his first roll was to fire his mortars, and they rolled a 12. So that removed them from any possibility of participating this particular turn. George Murray's men got 2 actions, and so they were able to advance a little bit further. They're desperately needed over here on the Jacobite right flank. And on this flank, Mordaunt's men got the first card, and so they got some good rolls, so they were able to fire and did a lot of damage to Cameron of Lochiel. They've lost a stand, and they fired over here, inflicted some more casualties on MacDonald of Keppoch's men. When Drummond's card came up, his artillery fired and didn't inflict any damage, and then he tried to charge MacDonald's of Glengarry. So they were disordered going through that regiment, and then charged across the river. The 27th Foot had already fired, so they were not able to issue any defensive fire. The Klansmen charged across. They had 6 dice. They're a large regiment. They're veterans, and they only managed to inflict 2 casualties. Whereas in the defense, only hitting on 5s and 6s, they inflicted 3 casualties, which drove back the Glengarry regiment back. And then Ligoniers, Dragoons have come up and taken position here behind Mordaunt's men. So the left flank of the government line is definitely solidified, holding its own. Drummond's men are not really up to the task by themselves. They need reinforcements desperately if they're going to do any damage here. The vulnerable part of the British line seems to be here in the middle, but as yet it's untested. So we'll see what happens on the next turn. Turn 5 saw a lot of the Jacobite cards drawn. The first card drawn was MacDonald, and he pulled back his bruised force. Artillery wasn't able to fire. It fired but didn't inflict any casualties. John Roy Stewart's men came up and basically to be a little bit more defensive, but on Lascelles' turn, his mortars fired and inflicted 2 casualties on John Roy Stewart's regiment there. Cholmondeley's men came on, and when he tried to get his artillery to deploy, he rolled a 12, meaning that his unit was done. Lascelles basically reorganized the 8th Foot, but that's about all that he was able to do. Then over on this flank, Drummond got his card drawn first. He fired his artillery to little effect, and then when he tried to pull back this MacDonald regiment, he rolled an 11. So it was done for his brigade. And on the ensuing turn, the next card drawn was Mordaunt's. The artillery fired, the line fired, and this regiment now basically is worn. So Drummond's brigade is taking heavy casualties with little effect. This line, I think, has lost 4 figures total, and Drummond's men are pretty much battered. The good news is that the Ogilvy's division of Lowlanders has entered the fray, and so that's 6 battalions of Lowlander infantry. They're not the best quality, but it's a substantial number of men. So that might be able to test the line a little bit. And Murray, very disappointingly, just got one action on his roll, and so he's slowly lumbering forward, but probably won't be there in time to do much help for Drummond, who's going to have to be pulling back pretty soon. So that's the end of turn 5. Moving on now to turn 6. Turn 6, it seems, was a lull in the battle. Ogilvy's men came on, tried to advance, but they rolled an 11. Not good. John Roy Stewart's men basically held their ground. The mortars fired and inflicted one more casualty on the 8th Regiment of Foot. Took out a stand. McDonald's cavalry is trying to move to the center position there. They were fired on in the flank, but the cannonade missed. Murray's men have advanced a little bit further, but again are still pretty tardy. Then over here, Mordaunt's card came up first. What had an incredible opportunity to just do a lot of damage to the remnants of Drummond's men, but on the first roll for the cannon, he rolled an 11, which means the whole division was not allowed to do anything. And then Drummond's card came up, and he rolled really well for his regiments. So he was able to reorganize them, pull them back, and so he's trying to get them out of cannon range. On this turn, the end of turn 6, all the remaining units come onto the field, which I believe is 2 brigades for the Jacobites, Stapleton's regiments of French regulars, which will be a big help, and then the Atholl Brigade under the Duke of Perth. And then for the British, Campbell's Lowlanders are coming in, government Lowlanders, Highlanders, and Wolfe's Brigade of regulars. So that'll be all of the combatants will then be on the field. Quite a traffic jam over here with Ogilvy not moving, so that's going to cause problems for deploying the brigade that's coming in behind them. So again, poor rolls for the Jacobites have really cost them. So we'll now move on to turn 7. Turn 7 was another fairly quiet turn. Duke of Perth's Atholl Brigade only got 2 moves. Stapleton's regulars, though, got 3, so they've advanced up. And George Murray's men finally got on the move and are now deploying for an attack on the center, which has been untouched so far. The cavalry kind of reorganized to lend some support. Drummond, wanting to pull back and kind of establish his line, disastrously tried to fire his artillery and rolled a 12, so he wasn't able to do anything. And then the last card drawn was Mordaunt's. He's been ordered by Hawley to push across the river to create some space so that the cavalry can get across and deploy. But each of his units that he rolled for only got 1 move. So their advance was very slow and not very effective. So that basically is kind of tied up Ligonier's cavalry and Campbell's militia here. Wolfe got 3 moves, and so he's taken his brigade to deploy here in the center, which was looking very vulnerable. Lasalle didn't do much. He fired his artillery. They inflicted a casualty on Murray's column there. And then Ogilvy's men just got 1 move, so they're just kind of slowly advancing. So Bonnie Prince Charlie, when his card was drawn, has attached himself to Ogilvy to see if he can get them moving a little quicker. John Roy Stewart's brigade, which is just very weak to defend this flank, but its artillery got a 3 actions, so they were able to reload and fire at this Limbard battery, and they inflicted 2 casualties on it. This is Chumley's battery, and so they're now worn. Chumley, on his activation, tried to get the artillery on limber. He rolled an 11, which meant that was the end of their turn, and he wasn't able to do anything. So I think things are going to really start picking up on turn 8. All the forces are on the table now, and it looks like the government left is going to try to sweep around and so they can get the cavalry out there in the open plain and do some damage. But there are a lot of Jacobites coming up in the rear, and Ogilvy's men can create some tent pressure here on the government right. So turn 8 should be a very, very active turn. So we'll move on to turn 8. Well, as predicted, turn 8 was very eventful. The most significant event was that Lord George Murray finally got his brigade in action and was able to launch a coordinated attack against Fleming's regiment of foot from LaSalle's regiment. And Murray's men just blow them over. They took some losses from the defensive fire. But then once across, Chumley's brigade got their card drawn, and they were able to fire a volley into this regiment here, and they're now worn. Mordaunt launched an attack. He attached himself to the 27th Foot, and they were successful in driving back MacDonald's men here. But in the course of the event, Mordaunt was wounded. Drummond's card came up, and he launched Clan Barksdale against this regiment, and they won by 1 point, so they drove them back and kind of put a crimp in the plans there. Ligonier is advancing his brigade, trying to get them across the ford here to do some damage. Stapleton's men have come up in support, so that's very timely. And then the Athol Brigade is making their move, trying to get across here. And then over on the Jacobite left flank, Bonnie Prince Charlie attached himself to Oglesby men, hoping to get them moving a little faster, but that wasn't successful. And Chumley's battery finally unlimbered, and despite the fact that they're worn, fired a volley at the column here, Oglesby's lead regiment, and took out 2 of their men. So first blood on Oglesby's men. So things are shaping up. If Murray's not supported here in the middle, you can see the substantial forces that are aligned to drive him back. So Oglesby men are absolutely necessary in the next turn to start putting pressure here on the government right. Otherwise, Murray's men really don't stand a chance. So things are getting very active here, and we'll move on to turn 9. Turn 9 saw some vicious fighting. Lord Drummond's card came up first, and so he decided to charge the 27th Foot with Cameron of Lochiel's regiment. They charged, they won the melee, drove back the 27th Foot, and are now here, but you can see facing them now is all of Ligonier's cavalry, so that could be decisive. General Mordaunt also was able to reorder these men in fire, but they miraculously only, despite rolling anything but a 1 or a 2, only inflicted 1 casualty on that column. Stapleton's men rolled well and were able to get 3 actions, and so they could move 20 inches and then go into line. So Royal Cassois is there, and the French Irish pickets are here. John Macdonald moved his cavalry here to the middle to offer some succor to Lord George Murray. The Atholl Brigade, Duke of Perthman, now formed a line here, so a secondary defense. The real story over here was Lord Lovett's regiment tried to follow up their victory and charge the regiment there. The other regiment rolled to see if they would support. They rolled 11, so that was the end of the turn for George Murray. This regiment went in, was hit with a devastating volley, and then lost the melee pretty significantly and were driven back. So they're now wavering in, down below half strength. When Cholmondeley's card came up, he charged that regiment into, let's see, who's this? Lady Mackintosh's regiment, and they were driven back, and they're disordered and worn now. So Lord George Murray is in a tough situation. Finally, Ogilvy's men were able to, they got 3 actions, and so you can see that they've taken up a position there along the river and ready, they can just storm across the bridge. So they're in a position to where they can actually maybe put some pressure on the British right flank, which will ease things. Another development, the dice rolling to see how many actions you get can be scary. And over here, Campbell's militia battalion of 4 regiments, desperately needed here in this open spot, rolled an 11, which means that they weren't able to do anything. And so, very eventful turn. The British still have a very strong position, but turn 10, we'll see what the Stapleton's men, good regiment there, and if the Royal Cassois can basically drive back that 1 regiment there, that creates a huge hole in the British line. That it all comes down to which cards get pulled first, and that's what I love about this game. All right, so let's move on to turn 10. Turn 10 saw a lot of action here on the government left flank. Lascelles' men took a pretty substantial beating. There was a firefight here between the Écossois and this regiment, and the Brits took the worst end of it. The Écossois got to fire 2 volleys, and so this regiment is worn. This one has 5 casualties, close to losing a stand. And then Mordaunt withdrew this regiment, the 27th. The Jacobites on their turn basically moved up. Macdonald's cavalry. Barkdale tried to move his men back. And then Ligoniers' cavalry came charging across the ford into the Irish pickets. All 7 of the dice that the cavalry rolled were hits. The pickets were able to inflict 3 casualties, but losing 4, they had to retreat 4 inches. They're disordered. And then miraculously, this Warren clan took the follow-through, and though they didn't inflict any casualties, the dragoons only inflicted 1, so basically they checked the charge, which was kind of a good thing. And then when Ligonier tried to bring up his reserves, he rolled an 11. That wasn't good. Campbell, trying to move his men into position, got 1 turn, so basically they're trying to get across this stone wall so they can get into position here in the center. Things went very well for the British here in the center. Wolfe tried to charge that wavering clan right there, but only got one action, and as a result of that, he came up a little bit short. But he did get the rest of his brigade deployed and ready to go. Cholmondeley, on his activation, was able to charge with this regiment, which is the 14th Foot, and they drove back Murray's battalion there, and then this battalion came up in support. LaSalle has 2 battalions left after Fleming's has been routed, and so these guys, they're protecting the bridge. And then this Ogilvy did a lot of activity and had hoped to get 2 activations for this lead column. Unfortunately, they just got 1. So it's going to be all important who gets the first initiative next turn. But he did attach his aide-de-camp to give them a little bit more of a chance should they be charged or whatever. Ogilvy's men have crossed the ford, and Roy Stewart's men have also gotten across. And so you can see that there's almost overwhelming odds here for these 2 battalions. So turn 11 is going to be a very, very important turn. And depending on what happens, we'll see. Turn 11 was quite eventful. The first card drawn was the Scottish aide-de-camp, and being attached to these Lowlanders, he was able to get them into line, and they fired a volley, inflicted some casualties on the Royal Scots, and so that was quite fortuitous. When Ogilvy's card came up, he rolled an 11, which means they could do absolutely nothing. The same for Cholmondeley and LaSalle. LaSalle rolled an 11 or a 12. His men could do nothing. Cholmondeley took advantage of his turn, charged one of Murray's battalions and drove them back. When Wolfe's card came up, they fired a volley into the wavering clan here and just basically wiped them out. And so they have a very solid line here. Roy Stewart didn't roll very well. His mortars had to stay put. He only got 1 turn for his own regiment here, so they formed an attack column. So they're pretty vulnerable to any fire, but they'll have a better chance of breaking through should they be able to charge next turn. Campbell's men were able to get over this wall and deploy, so they're now ready to enter the fray. You can see that the British have a very significant force here in the middle, and it's getting kind of sparse there behind the Scottish line. Ligonier also rolled a 12, so his regiments had to stay put. John MacDonald's card came up, and he was able to charge. He drove back these dragoons, and then of course these could do nothing because they got a high number. Stapleton was able to undisorder his pickets, and his Royal Scots got to reload, fire, and reload, and so they basically inflicted a lot of casualties here, and now this regiment is wavering. Drummond was able to unlimber his gun and fire, which inflicted a casualty or 2 on those dragoons, and then basically try to shake out reorganize his men. And Drummond is basically trying to pull back. His force is pretty much spent. He's got 1 regiment picked up, 1 is worn, and then others are basically on the verge here. So the Duke of Perth has basically put the Atholl Brigade in a secondary line, So we'll keep going with the game because it hasn't been won or lost by any means, but it's gonna. I think the British have a really strong punch here with Wolfe, Campbell basically untouched in their brigades, and enough strength over there on their right to hold them back. But we'll see. And we'll move on to turn 12. Here on the government right flank, I think was disappointing for both sides in terms of what could have been. MacDonald got his card drawn and charged Fitzsimmons' horse, and they were very successful in driving back these dragoons, but only inflicted one casualty. But then, in trying to get the horse guards to advance, he rolled an 11. So that stopped his progress right then and there. Ligonier, on his very first attempt to draw, rolled a 12, so he couldn't do anything. And now his brigade is very close to having to take a morale test. He's got one Raven brigade, and these guys are one casualty away. So that's very precarious. The aide-de-camp took charge of this regiment, and they charged Barkdale's men, but they were disheartened going across the river and only were able to inflict one casualty with no losses to themselves. So they were basically drawn backwards. Barrow's regiment sidled over to their left and fired a volley. They had 6 dice, would hit on 4s, 5s, and 6s, and despite that, they only inflicted one casualty on the Royal Écossois. So that was disappointing. Murray's men basically holding their own. They're pretty fragile here, but basically, you know, they're strong enough, along with Perth's support, to hold back that. Campbell's men got an order, but they're not really sure what to do at this stage. You know, should they be here prepared for a counterstroke, or do they need to go over here to the government right? We're not sure yet. The most climactic aspect of the battle was John Roy Stewart motivated his men to charge Cholmondeley's regiment with the support of a regiment from LaSalle. Basically, they won the combat by 1, but now both of those clans are worn, and because he attached himself, there was a chance he'd be killed, and he rolled an 11, which means you add 1. If he's attached, it was a 12. John Roy Stewart is now dead, and the aide-de-camp that would normally be ordered to relieve him, replace him, is now attached over here. Ogilvy's men basically just moving very slowly despite the prince's encouragement and exhortation. Just 1 turn each for each of the units, or 2, and then they get across in undisordered. But so they're on the flank here. So turn 14, Ogilvy really needs to get something going here. It's still a lot of fierce fighting ahead. So we'll see what happens in turn 14. Well, this is turn 13. I got a little ahead of myself. So this turn, Ogilvy was able to activate his forces. They charged the howitzers here and were able to drive them back, inflicting 2 losses, so that'll affect their ability. They got onto the flank of Lascelles' regiment here, but didn't do a lot of damage. So, and then he got this 1 regiment on the bridge to threaten the flank of Wolfe, who very aggressively is now trying to charge Murray's depleted brigade. And so they got across the river, drove him back, took a blast of canister, only lost 1 figure for that. Then here, Wolfe, you can see his brigade is stacked up one behind the other, and are very being aggressive, trying to break the middle here. They drove back the Écossois. They've lost the stand, so that's Stapleton's men have taken some pretty significant casualties. And then Campbell has moved his brigade up because it looks like this is going to be their push right here to try to break the middle of the line. Lasalle has kind of regrouped his forces so they're at kind of right angles, but this is a very precarious position. Bonnie Prince Charlie has come up to take command of Rob Roy's brigade in his death. So he was only able to rally these guys, get the disorder off them, but they're still worn. And then the aide-de-camp with one of Chumley's regiments here was only able to get them undisordered. So next turn they'll be ready to go and maybe can shatter John Roy Stewart's brigade. We'll see. The aide-de-camp leading the charge over here was wounded. Or who was wounded? Somebody was wounded. Oh. Stapleton was wounded. And not mortally wounded or killed, but... And then Barksdale's little regiment has been bullied. They've lost over half their men, but they were able to stop this regiment, just fight them to a draw and pull back. So Drummond's men are basically forming a secondary line. McDonald's men were able to charge. These guys charged unit of dragoons, so caused them to be wavering. So they had two wavering brigades, which is half of their brigade, so they had to take a brigade check, and they rolled a 3, which means they had to withdraw 10 inches away. So despite the fact that only 2 of his regiments haven't even lost a man, the brigade is considered shaky, and so they've had to pull back. So turn 14 should be very, very critical. We'll see what the government can do as things are coming to a conclusion here. On turn 14, the British did their best to pierce the center, but Stapleton's Royal Cassois were just amazing in fighting off Wolfe's reinforced attack. Chumley charged the battery. The battery withstood the charge. These lowlanders were able to fire a volley point blank into this regiment. Lasalle, this regiment had to take 2 volleys. The aide-de-camp rolled really well, and now they're worn. The veteran 8th took a charge of 2 lowland regiments, and being the veterans that they were, they drove it back in disorder. Prince Charlie had every hope of coming on and rallying these 2 clans, and then he rolled an 11, which means they could do absolutely nothing. Campbell's men have moved, shuffled to the right a little bit more, and then a disastrous blow for the government right is Ligonier had to take another break test to see if he could kind of stop the rule. He rolled a 1, which means that his whole brigade is now gone. So the left flank of the British Army is now basically exposed. So move on to the next turn and see if the Scotlanders can take advantage of the situation. Some stunning events here on turn 15. It was amazing how quickly the tide turned. The biggest turnabout was Bonnie Prince Charlie attached himself to Roy Stewart's worn brigades, risking his life in an all-or-nothing charge. Chumley had 1 regiment here under the command of aide-de-camp, and the aide-de-camp was able to get them undisordered, but they were worn. The charge went in. Bonnie Prince Charlie, because he was able to get the disorder off his guys, were able to inflict 5 casualties at the expense of none. So Chumley's regiment over here was picked up. Bonnie Prince Charlie got a 9-inch breakthrough, and so he's threatening these cannon and basically the entire flank. Campbell was able to get some of his soldiers in position here. The other big development is you'll see a big open space here. Once again, the Highlanders, the Lowlanders got 2 volleys into the flank of one of Cholmondeley's regiments, so they went from Warren to Wavering, with 2 of his 2 regiments wavering or picked up. He had to take a break test. He rolled a 5, but he had to subtract 1 because more than half of his units were off wavering or fleeing, so he had to pull back 10 inches. Then, in a last-ditch effort, Wolfe tried desperately to break Stapleton, the Royal Écossaise. They charged, but these stout Frenchmen in Scottish and French employ were able to lose by just 1. So they stopped the charge and had to withdraw disordered. So they're holding their own. The Irish pickets have kind of moved into position to put pressure on this regiment, which is close to wavering. And then, in a stunning development here, the Horse Guards, Prince's Horse Guards, are basically going to try to get into the rear, which would completely demoralize the army. So we're going to play one more turn and kind of see what happens after that. And I think 16 is a good round number. The Duke of Perth's have not even suffered any casualties. Their artillery was able to get into the fray this time. And this battery was just stellar in pouring volley into Cholmondeley's men as they were trying to get across that ford. So anyway, one last turn and our game will be over. We'll see if the British can pull it off or if basically they're going to be broken. Well, as one would expect, the end came rather quickly. Here on the right flank, Campbell brought up a battalion and fired a volley and was able to cause one of these units to waver, so they had to take a break test and pull back. Fortunately, Prince Charlie wasn't hit by anything. Oglesby's men basically just took advantage of the turn to regroup, get done disordered, reload, and be prepared. Wolfe's brigade just could not resist. They wanted to get rid of Stapleton. They did. They basically annihilated the Royal Écossaise and drove them off, which forced a brigade morale test for the brigade, and so Stapleton's brigade had to pull back, and the Royal Écossaise are no more. LaSalle took his break test. They had to pull back 10 inches. MacDonald, one of the first cards drawn. So his horse guards, the Prince's Life Guards, have come, and they are capturing Hawley ignominiously as he was trying to escape the field. So he's been captured. The rest of MacDonald's brigade is here, ready to cross the river banks and harass. Make sure that LaSalle Mordaunt isn't able to regroup. Drummond's men now have nothing in front of them, so they could basically, Wolfe, if we were to play another turn, would probably be annihilated. His flanks are completely exposed. He's there all by himself. Perhaps Campbell could come up and offer some support, but overall I would say that it's a resounding victory for the Jacobites, but it was a near-run thing. It could have gone either way, but in the end, they were able to turn the flanks. The British regiments began to suffer casualties, and so that's our game. I'm very, very pleased Had no idea how it was going to turn out. There were some stunning events, especially in turn 15, that kind of turned the tide. So anyway, we'll put together some reflections, but I think the rules played out really well, very realistic, I think, and can do a little bit more fine tuning or maybe defining, I think. But anyway, hope you've enjoyed this. I certainly have, and we'll look forward to the next time.